Okay, so we're live and well, folks. Welcome to December 2025, the final program for this year, and so let me welcome you formally to uh, Transforming Guyana: New Voices, New Vision. This profile series that is brought to you by the Guyana Business Journal, and as usual, I am your host, Dr. Terrence Blackman, chair and professor of mathematics at Medgar Evers College in the City University of New York. And tonight we're going to be diving into one of the most consequential stories of our time, Guyana's transformation from one of the poorest nations in the Western Hemisphere to the world's fastest, or one of the world's fastest growing economies. Our guest tonight is a conversation that has long been coming. Is uniquely qualified to guide us through this conversation. Dr. Vincent Adams spent 30 years at the United States Department of Energy, where he became an expert in environmental remediation, nuclear safety, energy policy. Dr. Adams holds a doctoral degree in environmental engineering from the University of Tennessee. But I think that what makes Dr. Adams truly exceptional is that he returned to his homeland, Guyana, when Guyana needed him most. And as the executive director of Guyana's Environmental Protection Agency from 2020 to 2021, I hope I have that correct, uh, he was on the front lines of the oil boom and negotiating with ExxonMobil, raising alarms about the environmental risks and advocating for Guyana's interests. And so tonight we can think of no better person to close the year out with Dr. Vincent Adams as we explore, really the high stakes choices that are facing Guyana. Production is now reaching 9 barrels per day, and the Natural Resource Fund stands at about $3.64 billion. And the point is, our perspective is that the decisions we make today will echo for generations. And so, Dr. Adams, I want to thank you for joining us and welcome.
Thanks, Dr. Blackman, and welcome to your wonderful listeners. And Merry Christmas and a Happy New Year. You guys, I envy you in Guyana for the season there with your nice pepper pot and everything else. But we'll do our part here. It's not going to be as fresh as the ingredients you get there, but but we'll do our very best up here. But thanks for having me, Dr. Blackman, and I really look forward to the conversation. By the way, I worked. It wasn't 20 to 2021. It was from 2018 to 2020 when I was at the EP in Guyana. Just a slight, it's a little bit earlier.
So let's start with the big picture. Uh, since the 2015 discovery in the Stabroek Block, Guyana has been transformed. Uh, if we're to believe, we now have 11 billion barrels of recoverable oil. Production has hit 900,000 barrels per day in November. The oil revenues have exceeded 2.2 billion in 2025 alone. You've witnessed this transformation firsthand. When you look at this today in December of 2025, help us understand the opportunity and the risks that you see in this context.
Okay, yeah. First of all, in terms of a perspective, and my perspective, I absolutely do believe that it's not 11 billion. It's and just put things into perspective. Um, Exxon or Exxon Mobil Guyana Limited, which is a subsidiary of Exxon. By the way, Exxon, the big company with the deep pockets, their name is not on any document. not in any document. So they're free of any liability if something happens. It's the subsidiary that owns all the liabilities, that doesn't have any type of asset. But nevertheless, I don't believe it's the $11 billion. The 11 billion barrels is much more than that, because remember the last update on this 11 billion barrels was given, what is it, 2022, which is going on 4 years now. And before that, after every well was drilled, we were getting an update. But we stopped getting updates, and we've had like 20 something more discoveries after that. So just to let you know, I know we talk about 11 billions, but in any case, this 11 billion barrels is a huge amount. We even if you use 11 billion barrels, Dr. Blackman, we have the 18th highest recoverable reserves in the world, more than a lot of countries that are claimed as producing countries. We have more reserves, twice the amount of reserves as Mexico. We have more than UK, etc. So it's a massive. So it's a so in terms of an opportunity, it's definitely an opportunity, a great opportunity. It's not only an opportunity, it's a blessing to a country like Guyana. I've always said that Guyana had the potential, even before oil, to become by far the richest country on the planet, because we have the type of weather we don't. We've got the potential with small population. We've got a lot of water, in contrast to the rich countries in the Middle East that all they have is sand and oil, and they have become rich. So why can't we? So we've got the potential, but then here is the blessing of oil, a lot of oil. However, you can have all the opportunities in the world that is given to you, and if you do not, the only thing that matters is what do you do with that opportunity? So that is the big question that we have to deal with, Dr. Blackman, is what do you do with the opportunity? And it's all about how well do you govern the oil industry. Or if you don't govern it well, these opportunities could go a waste, as we've seen in many countries, such as Nigeria, such as Venezuela, and I can go on with a big list of those countries. So
Well,
yeah,
I'm gonna ask you about Venezuela and perhaps Nigeria also,
yeah.
and maybe a bit about Norway. But what do you see? I mean, you've shared with us the opportunity. What do you see as the risk? Like, what is the big? What bad can happen to us in this situation at this moment?
Well, and in order to grasp the opportunity, first of all, the risk, the what can cause it is not having um, competent oversight. Trust me, the most important thing that in terms of governance is proper oversight. And I worked at the highest level of the U.S. government, and the one thing we made certain on our side, we invest heavily in making certain that we had the same or more firepower than the contractors that we oversight. So that's very, very important. And of course, one of the biggest risks, as we saw in countries such as Nigeria, is the corruption course. And with all of this inflow of money, it comes with it a lot of opportunities, if you will, for corruption, which can devastate the entire economy. It's not only that people are they're being corrupt, but it's how it impacts
You know,
the
you,
the rest of the population.
so
And
let
then
me ask. No, I
yeah,
wanted. So you mentioned that that business about Nigeria. So I want to ask you two questions to lead to that Nigeria thing. So this natural resource fund. I mean, when you read this, it's sitting at 3.64 billion US dollars.
yeah,
The government has withdrawn. When you're talking about oversight, the government withdrew 1.8 billion in 2025 alone. So a couple of questions: Are we spending it too fast? Uh, are we spending it too fast? And you know, how do we? When in the context of Nigeria has been producing oil for 60 years. We saw this recent report of our citizens living in poverty in Nigeria. A significant number of citizens still live in poverty. You understand this better than most. What lessons do we have to draw? I mean, I think of myself as sort of teaching. What lessons do we have to draw from from Nigeria, from the way in which we're doing oversight, to ensure that we don't end up in this place.
Yes. Well, like as a matter of fact, it's interesting that Nigeria has three separate sovereign wealth fund, which is the equivalent, it's similar to what we call our NRF. Three distinctly separate. So it looks good on paper. One is for infrastructure, one is for for future of the future generations. And then the third one, as a matter of fact, I had it here. But anyway, they have three for specific purpose, but it doesn't mean anything because you have it on paper. Like our mutual friend here, Mac Mackenzie, would always say, it's not how you look, is what you put. so 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 it's not how it looks on paper, is what how are you actually executing. So the one thing, if you notice that, Dr. Blackman, they're pulling money out willy-nilly because they have control of the legislative branch, which is parliament. So they don't have enough money for something, they go pull it out by the simple majority. What needs to happen, Dr. Blackman, which is how we operated, let's say, in the US government. And that, a lot of people might say, well, it doesn't work. It's basic accounting and how you manage. You must have in every one of your annual budget, it must be driven by a plan. What did we have? We always had a 3-year plan, a 5-year plan, and in some cases, even a 10-year plan that can change. So when you develop your annual budget, it's based on that plan. Before, when you go to Congress with your budget, or you got to go through the White House for it, the first thing they look at, okay, they look at those plans, and if you come to them with something different, they ask you, you gotta convince them that you need to change that plan. So there is no planning. All that is happening, folks are the powers that be wake up in the morning and say, you know what, I've got through my fancies, we need a new project. We don't have enough money for it, or we need money for it. And because you have the majority, you go and you vote to pull that money out. Now, here's the one thing about the Norway plan. And because the Norway model is very interesting. And I don't think a whole lot of people understands that the Norway model. But the one thing that restricts that willy-nilly and haphazard withdrawal, in the Norway plan, they limit you to not more than 3% of the value at any one time. You cannot withdraw more than 3%. With Guyana, as you can see, they're I'm surprised they hadn't gone to 100%. I'll be surprised if we do not empty that darn thing in a very short period of time. But I really want to talk to if you want me to do it right now, to expand a little bit more in the Norway model.
Yeah, I'd be happy, because you see, that's the question. People have always saying, well, is this realistic for us? What aspects should we take from this for us? I've seen people who have fiercely argued, like, the folks who support what the current sort of rates of depletion. They argue, well, okay, look, we need to do a big infrastructure spend now. And so we have to do it quick and fast, so that way we will spend big now and maybe later. So I think there's a lack of clarity for many people as to, okay, for Guyana, what's the optimum spend path? I mean, if you have $3 billion and you spend it out, that's $3 billion that you don't have, that you won't have again. And that means that future generations won't have access to that, and they must be buying something that is of interest, that is of value, that will be sustained over an extended period of time. And I think we've not been seeing that thus far. And so that's something that someone like you can more effectively speak to. Yes.
Well, from the inception, by the way, I've gone public, and for full disclosure, I am not a big fan of the NRF in such an early stage. And the very simple argument that I use, which I know that's the same argument that has made the Norway plan successful. Take your household, for example, Dr. Blackman. Remember what the NRF plan is, or the sovereign wealth fund is. is to invest that money for, for emergency projects, for the future generations, etc. Well, look at the Norway plan. Norway discovered oil in 1969. Do you know when they put up, and well, let's go back to the kitchen table. You were not going to go, Dr. Blackmon, or any, I don't think anybody else, because you wouldn't have money available, and invest money in whatever investment you're going to invest in, when you've got your family, your kids do not have food on the table, or you cannot afford to pay rent. Now, only money that you can afford to invest is excess money after you've taken care of those issues. In Guyana, based on the IDB recent report, even though it might have been outdated, we have they reported over 58% poverty in Guyana. We got to take care of that first. So, so here's what Norway did. Norway discovered oil in 1969. Do you know when they put a sovereign wealth fund in place? In 1990, 21 years after. But here's even further than that. Do you know when they put the first amount of oil money into that fund? In 1996, which is 27 years after. Do you know which was the first time that they withdrew any money from that fund? In 2016. 2016, which is what, 47 years after discovery. So they started putting money into the fund 27 years after. So my point is before that 27 years, when they started putting money into that fund, they took care of those needs, those basic needs of the country before they started putting money in the fund. And before they even started withdrawing. You know how much they have in that fund today? 2 trillion, not billion, $2 trillion. So to me, that model worked. It's common sense. It's how you normally run your household. But what we've done, or we've set it our fund, and we have no control over it because. And here's the other thing. Quickly, let me in our, even if you take, well, okay, we've got some type of a fund. This fund in the past administration, what the past administration did was to put a committee together for transparency. Is to have a committee of another committee, a board of 20 or 22, which is a lot, that touches a representation from the entire, the entire nation of every demographic. And when this new administration came in, what they said, no, we're going to cut the board to 5, and said, okay, however, we're going to have 2 members of the opposition. When the 2 members' name was submitted, and yours truly was one of those, they rejected the names. And so now, guess what happened? The government, all 5 members on that board are government appointees. My point is, there is no transparency, there's no independence whatsoever, and they've got full control of this fund. And that is the problem. We have no limits, and that is why, they just go to the fund and withdraw. And this is not politics. It is the facts that we need to fix if we're not gonna make the same mistakes that some of the failed countries made.
So I want to put this to you in 2 parts. So one of our listeners says our budget is increased by 4 times since the PPP took power in 2020, and the question is it sustainable? I want you to pause before you answer that question. Mm-hmm. So the as you were talking about the institutions that have been put together, so we're building institutions to manage this oil and this resource, and we've seen recently kind of the first signing bonuses into the NRF by Total Energies for Block 4 and another 17 million from Sibel for Block S7. So the thing is there an argument to be made that, okay, maybe we're making some progress in building the kinds of institutions that you think might be necessary, or are we on as the listener is sort of noting, are we on an unsustainable path? I mean, he's identified for us NRF withdrawals, and pointing out how we're taking the money out and whether or not that could be a sustainable thing. So is the fact that we're getting these signing bonuses now, and it appears that the sort of new PSA thing might be working, that we're building the kinds of institutions that could be serving us in the future, or that's maybe
No,
no.
no, and absolutely no. Okay. So, I could spend the entire night telling you why with some good examples. However, with this specific signing bonuses, I I don't know how to when I saw that we're collecting signing bonus even before a single barrel of oil has been discovered. Now, there's this concept, and I get calls all the time, even from people who wanted to invest in the shallow waters. The shallow waters are totally different from the deep waters. That is all where oil has already been discovered. So, my advice was to them, to be honest, Dr. Black must follow and see where Exxon is going, because Exxon is probably the only company that has the data out there with their seismic activities and their drilling, because but there to start with, the whole signing bonus thing, it's, to me, I would not go into there giving a signing bonus, and there's such big uncertainty as to whether there's oil. In the case of the Stabroek block, we were looking for oil offshore since in the 60s. So when Exxon came along, and then they signed that PSA in 1999, the PSA wasn't signed in 2016. The PSA was signed in 1999 by Janet Jagan. There was no signing bonus. The signing bonus came into being in 2016 when oil was discovered. That's when you do. No company should, well, but it's their money. However, the cost of drilling one well, at least in the deep waters, we're looking at over 100 million US dollars. And you drill a lot, especially if you don't know where there's oil, it costs a lot of money to drill one well, and one well may not even give you the data you need to know that you have oil. No oil has been discovered in the shallow waters. Nobody knows. So it's a high risk to the investors. But then again, that's the way I would treat it if it was my money. But it boggles my mind that this here would be something that we're asking for signature bonus when we have not discovered any oil in the shallow waters. And maybe we will discover, but I think we're putting the cart before the horse, to start with. So no, and I can go on as to this whole thing about this cover about saying we have revised or improved the PSA.
Yeah.
That we do not know how much oil. We do not know even if there is any oil in the shallow waters. We know for sure that the PSA, the only PSA that matters right now that we know of, is the Stabroek block, that this same administration said before they got into office that they will renegotiate that contract. That's what the people want. That's what the government promised, and that's not what they're doing. And by the way, in that same PSA, it says that it provides, if there's a provision, and I think at Article 42 or something, it provides for changing the PSA as long as the other party has agreed to. We have not even asked Exxon. We have never even asked Exxon, because I have written about it and challenged the government to at least ask them to change to that. We would like to renegotiate that contract, but the government in power said, I've never ever even asked the question.
So actually, I wanted to continue. I mean, because that was what I was aiming at here in terms of, taking you. You were in a sense an insider. When these issues came to a head around, the royalty rates, liability coverage, and all of these matters. Take a moment to walk us through and give us a sense from your expert perspective. What are the issues that we as Guyanese, not only in Guyana but also globally, sometimes we're excited to see the boom, but what should we also be seeing on the back end of this thing to make an informed judgment in terms of what our policy will be looking like going forward?
The bottom line is that we are only getting 14.5%. So And I'm glad you asked this question. We are getting 4.5%. So do not. It is propaganda and a falsity when Exxon puts up billboards around the country saying that we're getting 52%. It's an impossibility for us to ever get 52%, because the way that that the money is shared out, and we paid in oil, by the way, we're not paid in cash, but nevertheless. So for every 100 barrels of oil that comes up, 75 barrels, and it's not a cap. I'm gonna explain this 75, because I bet you that most people do not understand what this 75 barrels mean that they call cost oil. So they take out 75%, 75 barrels, which is 75%. 75% goes towards the cost of operations and the cost of paying back those loans and capital costs for drilling and everything else, because they have taken a lot of loans and investors. So there are two costs in that 75%. The cost of operation, like salaries and subcontractors, and the cost of paying back, like your mortgage, what I call the mortgage. So when you add those two up, they cannot go above 75%. Here's the catch, Dr. Blackman, and which myself and others have been begging for. We do not know if it's 75% or if it's 90%. The government does not show us the quarterly reports that should reflect how much is going towards capital, how much is going towards expenses. And so let's say it's 90% really. Let's say it's really 90%.
Not to cut you before you continue. Is there any immediate thing that says why these reports would not be available in a
No.
transparent fashion?
Well, when I know I have been writing and asking, and some other people, and I saw the vice president in a couple of his Thursday press conferences. You know what he said? He said that the people of Guyana will not understand those reports, which is very insulting. He said it's a really basically above our heads. We would not understand those reports. So that's one of the excuses. But no, they were never published. But here's the other kicker about this 75%, because I want people this is very important. So when you remove that 75% or 75 bars, guess how much is left? 25, right? So that's where you split 50%. So it's not 50% of 100. Exxon or EPGL, EMGL gets 12.5%, and we get 12.5%. On top of that, they pay a royalty of 2%, but it's not a full 2%. It's 2% less the cost of fuel and everything else they'll use in the ship. But we use 2% so let's say 14.5%. So we get 14.5%. They get 85.5%. But here's the kicker, Dr. Blackman. Let's assume we don't know if it's cost really 75 barrels per month. Let's say it's 90. That 15 extra that it costs, you know what happened to Dr. Blackman? It goes over into the next month and the next month and the next month. So that's why I bet anybody, we will never, in my estimation, throughout the life of this project, be able to get rid of these capital costs and that extra cost that adds up, that compounds every month. So we will continue forever to get 14.5%, regardless of the Exxon putting up.
Wait, Doc, give me some clarity here. So you're saying that the cost. So that we have 100 barrels. 75 is for Exxon. 25 is to be split between us and Exxon.
Yep.
And then we have the 2%, which goes across the 100 barrels. But now you're saying that the accounts that have to be defrayed by the 75 barrels really require more than 75 barrels. And
that's what we don't know.
I see.
Yeah,
so how do we know that if we don't know
that's the point. We do not know if you know that it's more than 75%, because the rest, they wouldn't have been capped. They wouldn't have been giving us this 75% as cost oil as the maximum when they account for our profit. If it was less than 75, let's say it was 60 instead of 75, that means it would have been 40 remaining, and we would have been getting 20
Yeah,
plus
20.
2. So the fact that we're getting 75 means, and the fact that the contract says that anything above 75 is going to be carried over and over. It's like you have it's like you, Dr. Blackman, have a credit card, and every month you're charging $1,000, for example, but you're only paying $100. Every month you pay 100, but you're charging 100. It's the same. So that is one of the big elephants in the room that people are not paying attention, is that carryover cost. And on top of that, do you know what the 6 projects right now, in terms of the capital cost, it's over 60 billion US dollars for the 6, and it's heading to 100 billion US dollars. But we do not know how much. In your mortgage, when you get your house, in a mortgage, you get a statement, you get the thing that tells you for the 30 years of your mortgage or whatever, you get an amortization schedule. Let them tell us, show us what is that amortization schedule, and when will we be finished paying off that mortgage, so that we would only be paying on the operations costs to get more in
Is this
profit.
kind of thing that you're describing as standard part of like what should happen in the industry? Is this like, in other places where people are?
That's correct.
Yeah.
And it's in the contract. It's in the contract. So this is not what should happen, in other places. That's what's in the contract. But here, what was so interesting, up to a few weeks ago, Dr. Blackman, Mr. Rutledge was in New York. And, the question was asked, when will we be finished paying off the capital cost, so that part would be removed from the cost style, and we would only have to pay the operations cost, which would really raise. You know what Mr. Rochester said? You would not believe. He said next year, which is a blatant lie. We have right now, it's over $60 billion for the 6 project, because there's no ring fencing. All of the projects are tied together. So it's not a case when you have Lisa 1, which is I think it's like 2 point something billion or something. We probably finished paying for maybe 2 projects. So we should have been finished paying off the capital cost for those 2 projects and getting that real 50%, or the higher 50%, when you remove only the operation cost from it. Let's say the operation cost is, I don't know, let's say 30 barrels. If you finish paying off your capital cost, the operation cost is only 30. So cost style now will only be 30%. So you've got 70% to split. So we get 35 plus 2, 37%. So we finished paying for 2 projects. So we would have been getting that 30 or 40% based on what the operation cost is from those 2 projects. But the problem is all the projects are tied together. There's no ring fencing.
Yeah, some of the economists will say, well, maybe you don't want the ring fencing because then you will restrict their ability to, continue to invest. But I think
that's and I've got the rebuttal for that, to rebuttal for that, because that's absolute. The competitors from day one were beating down the doors. What people do not understand, we bailed Exxon out, Dr. Blackman. I don't know if you know, but Exxon was in serious financial problem. They were laying off people. They were shedding their high liabilities until they declared that they discovered oil in 2015. As a matter of fact, Exxon was removed off of the list of the Dow Jones Industrial Average companies, which is the top 30 companies. Exxon was removed. And as soon as they declared that they discovered oil in Guyana, they had leverage to go out there and buy up new properties, like in the Permian Basin, for example, where I had worked. So we bail out Exxon. So Exxon need us more than we need them, because Chevron, the same Chevron that came in, Chevron was beating down Guyana's doors to get in. And Exxon was basically keeping them out. And so this big fight when Chevron was trying to take Hess's share, big fight was deeper than what people saw on the surface, because Exxon did not want their main competitors to be in Guyana. That's a fact.
Yeah. This is I'm looking at the time and we're already running too fast. But there are a couple of other issues which I wanted you to bring some clarity to, which you've been a vocal advocate of. So the question of the insurance coverage, that is one that I certainly want you to, and then once you've addressed this question around the insurance business, then I want you to kind of speak to another issue which has popped up in the news, where you talked about this directional drilling and the possibility of uh,
Right,
yes. So maybe just first the help us understand,
right.
or help folks to
And
understand this perspective on the insurance.
and let me again, and the this my good friends in the government, they tend to distract or to confuse people about talking about insurance. It was never insurance. When I arrived at the EPA, the Lisa one was already signed. And what Lisa one said was that in the Lisa one permits, it said, and in the contract, as a matter of fact, said that they could be self-insured. Well, guess who's self-insured? It's not Exxon, it's Exxon's subsidiary, which was EPGL at the time. So my first question was, who pays for an oil spill? Which, when the Lisa 2 came on my desk, I said, who will pay for an oil spill? They said, well, we're already self-insured. I said, self-insured. So where are your assets? Because this is a new brand company, had not produced a barrel of oil, so they had no assets. So he said, well, it's what the contracts are. And you know what I told him that time? I said, Dr. Blackman, I said, you will not produce a barrel of oil unless we get a parent company guarantee, meaning Exxon has to sign a document saying that they guarantee that they will cover any oil spill. After pushing back, they decided, they signed off on it. Okay. Well, what happened was they signed off and everything. The government changed. As soon as the government changed, they decided to renege on it. And that what caused the lawsuit, if you, as you recall, the lawsuit of the two citizens.
Yeah.
And Judge Kissoon ruled overwhelmingly in favor of what we had already in the permit. It was clear crystal. But what it says, where the insurance came in, because the first thing they told me, they're gonna go get insurance. I said, well, okay, how much insurance you gonna get? No insurance company will guarantee you for that kind of money. The Macondo spill cost 145 billion US dollars. No insurance is gonna get you that, which is with British Petroleum had to cover as the company. So I said, don't bring that to me. So you could even get $1 insurance. I don't care. What the language has to say is that Exxon, the parent company, has to cover all of the liability covered above that insurance. It's like when you go to a doctor, your insurance company only covers one part of it, and you got to cover the rest. So that was the simple language. You know what this current government did, Dr. Blackman? Because now they appeal the case. They appeal the case which was, I think it's the appeal is now I think it's probably being heard now, but it doesn't matter. They went before Parliament and put in a law that is called an oil spill bill, with the one seat majority, and overrode, for all practical purposes, overrode the ruling of Judge Kissoon. So that's what's going on. So here we are now. If we have a spill, Dr. Blackman, we have no coverage. And then this whole thing, the vice president keeps saying, well, we can seize the assets of the limited liability company, which is ENGL. First of all, they don't have any assets. He said they have 14 billion. All of those assets belong to the government of Guyana. It is clear in the contract. So we'll be seizing our own assets, which doesn't make any sense. But the whole thing is here. It was this Exxon, which is a strategy that all these major companies do to get rid of liability or to hide from liability. They would set up these limited liability companies below them, and they're just sitting in the back. So if anything happens, they could just walk away because the company doesn't have any assets. They walk away, and Exxon is free. So that is what's going on here.
I understand. I think you brought some clarity to that. It's certainly the case that uh, I understand with clarity, and I think everyone would understand what you're saying now, that uh, whatever the cost of the insurance policy, that may or may not cover the cost of the actual
That's
cleanup.
correct.
And in order, uh, and Guyana should, by right, then have some clear representation, understanding from the parent company that
That's
says,
right.
beyond whatever is there, we are committed to
That's
ensuring
correct.
that
That
things.
is
And
correct.
I don't think anyone would reasonably disagree with that policy. Now, the government, as you have somehow maybe. So what is the language? Could you say what the language is that they have passed into law that would obviate what you've just described?
No, what they said, they're saying that yes, the company is liable, but it doesn't matter. Like for example, those small companies, let's say on these small offshore leases, they don't have any kind of access to cover an oil spill. So to just say that the company has to cover it, which is exactly what's in the. You remember I told you about the self-insured in the contract. It doesn't mean anything to say that the company has to cover the liability if they don't have any assets. That is why we said that Exxon, the parent company, has to guarantee that they will cover it because their subsidiary doesn't have any assets. Let me give you a case in point. In Nigeria, there was a case, very similar case. There was lots of spills, and there was a lawsuit. I can't remember it by the government, or I think it was by citizens, that was heard in London and against Shell. And
Yeah,
you know
this
what
I
was
remember
Shell?
this. This is the
You know what was
Ogoni land with Ken Saro-Wiwa and others.
yeah? You
Yeah,
know what was Shell's defense? That it wasn't them. It
yeah,
was their subsidiaries. That was their defense.
yeah. Yeah, I want to come back to this, but I want to. I'm being mindful of the time, and I know the demands. So I wanted to, uh, some of the environmental thing. I remember you talking about the flaring and
Yep.
the injection of the re-injection of gas and so on. I was hoping that we could say something about that, but maybe I'll leave that for another. I'll leave
Yeah.
that for another one. The one that I wanted to one was this one, the
Yeah.
question about how our potential, this directional drilling risk that you raised. Explain that to us, because I think many people have no idea of something of this sort.
Directional drilling is one of the new technologies. And like in my time when I was in our industry, we did very little directional drilling. We had directional drilling that we didn't even plan for. When you drill, the thing just goes in its own direction. You start drilling a well here at the top, and then you found yourself a mile away. But now you control. So you go, let's say you're drilling a well, you go vertically and then you go horizontally, but you control that. You go vertically, let's say, I don't know, a mile deep, but then you go horizontally across for any amount of distance that the technology would allow. So when I heard that Suriname, for example, was talking about discovering oil offshore, because if you look at the blocks, there is just a line that separates, is just rejoined together. It's not, of course there's a line on a piece of paper. So, and the reservoirs do not see geographical boundaries or international boundaries. So what could potentially happen, and and by the way, I think it's block 4 or 5. Guess who owns that block?
So
Chevron.
yeah,
Right across the border, Chevron owns the block 4 or 5, and it butts up against our properties. So what they can potentially, I'm not saying that they're doing, they can go down and then go under the border below the ground that you can't see and tap into our oil. So we set up a meeting because of that concern. So we set up a meeting in Suriname. 3 of their top ministers were there. Statsol was the company, was there. So I asked the question. I said, is this, could you share? Because the whole meeting was about sharing information. So we decided we're going to share information. But when I asked the question, I got a kind of a nervous response. And but anyway, we decided to share information. So I said I would like to see the well bore, the drilling, the well bore diagram and everything else. So the first correspondence they sent back acknowledging the meeting. On the correspondence, they had the letterhead with Guyana. You remember that disputed piece of
On the
they had
news.
that
Right? Yeah.
on their map. So we all agreed that we're gonna tell them that we are not acknowledging the letter and they gotta change it. And they didn't, I don't think they even responded. So that whole conversation broke down. I raised it again, I brought it up with a lot of the folks now in government, but I've not heard anything. But I think it's an issue that needs to be addressed. I'm not saying that it's happened. However, we need to let them share that information as to whether they're, how they, if their wells are coming below our border.
Yeah, so thank you, Dr. Azim. So here is an issue. So it turns out the outside world is, and I know you came in saying I don't want to deal with political matters. I only want to deal with technical matters. But it turns out that the political matters are impinging upon you. So I just saw this note. Someone says, well, folks are watching the president right now, and this comes to the question that I'm sure the president. So we should say that our discussion was not planned relative to around or to preempt or to in any way compete with the president's conversations. But we're here, and we're at the place where I think there might be some alignment with where the president was going or is going. This is local content and what I want to call your vision for 2040. Uh, the Local Content Act, which was something that came on, it requires all companies to prioritize Guyanese workers and businesses, and the hope is that this will transform the oil wealth into some sustainable prosperity for Guyanese. We mentioned the question of poverty earlier, so we know that we're not there yet. So the question is the Local Content Act working? Are Guyanese, broadly speaking, benefiting, or are we seeing sort of just like fronting, where these foreign companies kind of use local partners?
Well, and just to set people at ease here that it's not political either, because even when I was at EPA, I was criticizing the local content, documentation that was submitted by the government at that time. As a matter of fact, I was at a conference in London, got, it surrounded the oil and gas in Guyana, and the local content was one that I got up and criticized. And the reason why I criticized it, there was nothing form that you can measure in terms of benefits. For example, and we deal with local content in the U.S. government all the time, but you have to put specific numbers. For example, you have to tell the contractors that you have to spend, let's say, whatever the number is. We used to use a number 50%. 50% on local contracts or 70% on local contracts. And you know what? They would normally come back and say, because a lot of times our big projects, where we have our nuclear waste complexes, so that's where a lot of big billion-dollar projects are. They would say, well, you don't have the expertise because these in desolate areas that you don't have the expertise. So you know what we would do, Dr. Blackman? We came up with something to counter that is called a mentor protege program, that we're going to give you like you set a time, an agreeable time for you to train that company within 3 to 5 years to do the work. So within 3 or 5 years, they're capable of doing those contracts. So you're not going to bring contractors from outside of the area. It's the same thing. But on top of that, I don't know if you've been following, because I follow these things. Our employees on these FPSOs were treated as second-class citizens. they were eating left. Their meals were leftovers after everybody were finished eating. That was in the newspaper, so that I'm not making this stuff up. On top of that, their wages were much lower. Their time off, they weren't paid for it. Their leave and everything was totally different. Even the Trinidadian crews had to join with them in protest. So those are the kinds of things that we need to make sure that we have in place. But a mentor protege program, and I talked about this at a forum in Guyana once with the public. I think it was with the not the public, the private sector commission meeting, one of their meetings. But it's a key program to develop there. And you just because what's going to happen, we're going to end up after a few years that we're going to be treated the same way. And the biggest excuse they're going to say, well, you don't have the competence, and we have nothing. We don't have a counter to that without this mentor protege program.
Let me what would be like your top three priorities in relation to this local content structure, given the experience that you've had with the US government and the way in which it has kind of rolled out things of that nature?
Well, without question, I think it first of all, we have to get competent people on our side. And the one thing that we did, it was like religion to us, like I said, to make sure that on our side, in terms of oversight, to make sure that they're doing exactly what the law calls for, is for us to have as much or more firepower than they have. So we've got to build that confidence for oversight. The second thing is, of course, is this whole mentor protege program in terms of the local content. So we have to, all the labor laws and everything else, we have to have competent people to make sure, because a lot of times these companies, they come in and they're not even following our own laws. And of course, we probably don't have any time, but I can tell you about where they're violating our own laws, like producing above the safe operating limit through greed to keep your production up. So those are the two things, without question, to make sure we have proper, competent oversight on our part. And on top of that, you introduce this thing by strong institutions, which is, guess what, the foundation of running the oil and gas industry, or any industry. Strong institutions mean that institution, first of all, has to have a competent staff and leadership, and be independent without interference from the government. Dr. Blackman, the reason why I was so successful in turning and transforming the EPA was because there was zero interference from the president, who was in charge of the EPA. Never wanted, with all the controversies. And we used to be shutting down operations, including Exxon. We shut down Exxon. We shut down big companies in Guyana, mining companies, when they violated the law. And the president, nor Joe Harmon, or nobody ever called me and interfered with what we were doing at the EPA. So that's what you need. You need competence, without question, for oversight, the mentor protege program, and you definitely need a strong institution without any interference whatsoever from the government.
Yeah, so we have to have another conversation, because I think there's some issues that will, there are lots of questions. So I just want to read them into the record, and then you can. So the questions, like, what specific reforms this is from the audience, would you recommend for the National Resource Fund to ensure that it truly benefits future generations? Given your experience at the U.S. Department of Energy, how does Guyana's regulatory capacity, and I think this is an issue that you just raised, how does Guyana's regulatory capacity compare to what's needed for safe oil production? So I think, the strength of Guyana's regulatory capacity is far less than the strength of the regulatory capacity of the United States government. And so maybe it would be more difficult for us to to hold the line in some respects, as you have just described.
But let me address quickly.
Wait, let me just put two more in because I
Yeah,
just
yeah, go ahead.
right. So,
I should be
is it
taking a
too
note.
late to renegotiate the 2016 Exxon contract? What leverage does Guyana have? How can ordinary Guyanese hold the government accountable for how oil revenues are spent? And what role should civil society and the media play in monitoring the oil sector? And then I'll just put two more. So, what has been some of the main outcomes of your advocacy since 2020, and which outcomes are gaining greatest traction? And then finally, is it feasible for the government to offer citizens the opportunity to obtain direct equity in Guyana's windfall from oil by offering choice to purchase bonds, shares in a fund that utilizes oil revenue for investment? So there have been a lot of questions, and so we have to sort of maybe, come back to this in the new year, but maybe have it be not so broad and maybe more focused in some specific areas. So take whichever one you want to take there,
Well,
because we're already at 55. And
the easiest one here, and I think they were asking, well, basically, what would I do? Well, what would I do is what I did when I arrived at the EPA. The EPA had no capacity. The work ethic, there was no, even the staff themselves. The very first meeting I had with the staff said that they're dysfunctional. Nobody respects them. All of that was transformed through good leadership, and that's what people need. Because even the board, when I arrived there, for they said, Dr. Adams, everything that you were advocating here, it wouldn't work here. This is not the USA. But we prove them differently, because all that people look for, they want to do the right thing as long as they get good leadership. But in terms of oversight, because that's where I focus first of all, we set up we went to the World Bank. I got $1 million from the World Bank to set up a petroleum unit within the EPA, because there's not a single person, and it's been over 5-6 years now, not a single person in the EPA right now who has even a 1 hour of training in oil and gas. Well, guess what we did with that petroleum unit, set up with a bank, and we set up an organization with a 36-member team of high power professionals. You have to have at least 5 to 10 years qualifications, academic and experience in oil and gas to be on board those FPSOs 24/7. I had already made that arrangement with Exxon to have them on board. A study leave program at EPA, where we were going to be sponsoring employees to go study wherever you want to go study, but you have to come back and serve 5 years with the EPA. I was involved. As a matter of fact, my good friend, Ivlaw Griffith, who was the vice chancellor, he brought me in at UG to head to the transformation, or the revamping of the engineering and technology department at UG, to set up the petroleum engineering department. We set up that department, and we were supposed to be turning out graduates by 2022. And I don't know what happened to that program, but those are the capacity building things that we were needing. Oh, in addition to that, I had already made arrangement with Exxon to have our employees go to Exxon's university, because all of these major companies have their specialized universities. Exxon has there in Houston. I worked for British Petroleum. I was in Tulsa. I had already made arrangements for all this. All of that was scrapped. And so that was that's something that I think, if I had my judges, without question, we have to build capacity rather than accepting everything that Exxon and the other companies throw on our table, and then we're not in a position to even question it.
Well, I know we're right there. So give me 5 more minutes of your time, if you. I know that I need that 5 minutes for something which we talked about earlier.
Right.
But give me 5 minutes. I want to just probe right there. That is as simple as the day. The government must know that the first order of business in effectively managing the oil and gas industry is to have people who are sufficiently trained in that area. Why would they? Why would they, as a matter of like not being serious, not ensure that there are people from our environmental protection agency, and whatever happened to the, the, remember, there were two things. There was your the environmental protection agent, which you were the head of, and then there was Mark Bino
Yes,
running. Whatever happened to that
it was
part of
disbanded. It was that organization was immediately disbanded with this new administration. And myself and Dr. Bino work very closely together. You know, without question. Whenever he's got his major meetings with them, I'll be there as the technical person in petroleum engineering. And but we work very closely together. And but they disbanded that, and so we
this
don't have that
all
organization.
these functions now just fall under the Ministry of Natural Resources,
That is correct.
as
That is
opposed
correct.
to as opposed to we're almost out of time, and I want to give you the final word. But so here's my question. So it's 2025. It's December 17th. We're coming to the end of the year. So 25, 35, 540. So 15 years out, 2040. Kids who are 3 years old today, they'll be adults. So they'll be 18. They'll be 18 now. So, when you think about, say, Guyana in 2040, so we have these kids who are today, they're 15 years from now, they're adults. What do you hope that they will say about the choices that we made today, and what's your message to them?
Well, I'm hoping that they're gonna say that we tried our very best. We looked based upon lessons learned from the countries that failed more than anything else, and also did we follow those countries that were successful, such as Norway and the other countries. So we do not want them to look back and say, something, you guys saw what happened to those Nigeria and Venezuela, and we've ended up with the same thing. What I would like to, what I and many others, yourself, would like to see is that here we have revenues, God given revenues that we didn't even know were coming, a blessed country. We need to invest in the young people of Guyana. Guyana, half of Guyana's population is below the age of 26.
Yeah.
We need to use this money, invest in them. And when we talk about even going back to the NRF, and that's what Norway did, is to use that money to invest in these youngsters. So when we talk about money being put aside for a future generation, there's no better investment than, rather than even waiting to put aside that money for the future, we should be investing in them today. There's no better investment than moving forward, spending of that money on them, which is exactly what Norway did. So that's what we like to see, that when they look back and say, you know what, we were given all of the opportunities in the world, to be successful, and we have been successful by the opportunities that we were getting, based, provided by the oil wealth that we were given.
Dr. Vincent Adams, thank you for your candor, your expertise, and your continued commitment to Guyana's future. To our viewers, this conversation, as you can see, is just beginning. I mean, I think that, you know, it just struck me as I was listening to you, uh, you know, Mark Bino and yourself forming that kind of structure that was part of the APNU's, if you will, approach to the management of the oil and gas sector in Guyana. It's interesting that we just had an election and we didn't even have a conversation at all about what the optimal structure for managing Guyana's oil and gas economy would look like. We continued just along in a kind of quasi ad hoc manner. So there's much that this conversation needs to continue to explore. And I think you're absolutely right. The decisions that get made today, really shape the nation. And it's not that far. We can see it right here. A 3-year-old, 15 years down the line, is 18 years old. And so we can see that what's happening now will shape the lives of many people there. And, I want to thank the viewers for, the number of questions that came in. And, hold it. Maybe just keep sending the questions. I'll leave the site up and just keep adding the questions to the site, and we'll come back to this. And then finally, just to want to wish all of the folks in Guyana really a wonderful Christmas. It's my favorite time of the year. Uh, you know, enjoy your black cake, your ginger beer, your mob tea, all of the things. Your pickled onions. I
That's
was
right.
I always remember my father used to have these things when people come over, they'd have these little toothpicks with cheese and
Cheese
pineapple.
and onions. That's right. And sausage. That's right. Cheese and
Yeah,
onions.
and all these things on it. So, you know, enjoy your pepper pot, and we look forward to continuing the conversation in January. And so everyone be safe. And again, thank you, Dr. Adams, for sharing the expertise with us. It was a pleasure, genuine pleasure.
Thanks, Dr. Blackman, and thanks to our listening audience.
Yes, thank you. Uh, thank you. I want to say that requires many more conversations. As you were
Yeah.
talking, I realized that I should have some I should have some uh,